So the following conversation is between me, Jesse McCarthy with MontessoriEducation.com, and Simone Davies of the MontessoriNotebook.com. Simone and I sat down one Saturday morning over Skype and just asked each other a few challenging questions around teaching and parenting, what we thought of as kind of gray areas in Montessori. In this second clip, and there are 5 in total, we talk about topics related to the home, especially, what's important to have in it.
So, Jesse, for someone on a budget, what 3 things do you think would you suggest as being things you'd prioritize making available in the home? And it could be activities, it could be furniture, it could be, whatever come to mind.
Yeah. So, funny enough, it just occurred to me now. I hear this, or I see a lot of posts about, these Montessorians with all this money. I just made this and it cost me 50 cents or something. And it's funny because I hear these things and I think it's cool. People are creating like really inexpensive things, but it's also, I started to think like, it's not that expensive to really do stuff unless you're talking about like making a Montessori classroom, like $30,000 classroom. But otherwise you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like, and it's really Montessori and it's not too expensive. So generally speaking, I like the idea of kind of creating stuff, but also you can spend a little bit of money, like save some money for some cool items that actually are helpful. And maybe you have more experience in the toddler level with what those might look like. Some of the, like a few more expensive items versus the budget ones. But in terms of budget stuff, I mean, one thing that comes to mind easily, like low shelving. Like those now are so cheap and they're all over the place. So, when I was thinking about this question, I thought, well, yeah, listen, if you really don't have money, go out to like Home Depot, get some wood, get some nails, get some sandpaper and get some paint and make some low shelving. And I mean, I think that'd be kind of cool if you do that, with your husband, or if you're a man with your wife or whatever you guys have in your relationship, go out and do that. But I'm thinking it's probably cheaper now to go buy all that fully made at like IKEA or something. And there's low shelving. So low shelving immediately comes to mind. I have a few others, but I wanted to jump in and see, what do you think of that so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think making things accessible is great. And I've even been to houses where they rent, so they can't, or they don't want to invest in shelving even. So we've kind of like used the inside of a wardrobe that's built in and made the low shelves there, like a spot where you can put the toys. In Amsterdam, we have quite low window sills. Is that what you call it? Where like the bottom of a window, and you can lay 3 puzzles along a windowsill. Yeah. Or some people might use a coffee table, and it's just about limiting the activities as well. So I do think you can be creative, and like you say, like nowadays you can buy quite cheap shelves. And I think the shelving is kind of attractive and makes us go back to Montessori principles about less is more. If I just have out 6 things, and 6 things in a nice attractive trays and baskets so the children can help themselves, then you really find that you don't just have toys lying around that you've had out for years, but really they're only things that your child's working to master right now. So you'll find them much more engaged and much more likely to put them back, and there's less things to trip over. So I just think it's a win-win. Yeah, of course.
And I think I'm also raising that kind of like, get something nice too. Cause like there's this play area behind me. This is not my like work area. I'm in somebody's house and they have a few kids, so this is their attic. But like behind me, there's a different bunch of cool stuff. But then there's just like, a brown box, like an empty brown box that we all know. Like you give that to a kid and they'll figure something out fun with that. So it's cool to have these kind of budget things, but also have something that's really pretty and delicate to you, or something like that. I think that's really cool to have an item it doesn't have to be, thousands of dollars or something, or even hundreds of dollars, but mix it up so it's not just all homemade kind of, I don't want to say it's not trashy, because you can make really nice stuff homemade, but every now and again, like I know it's particularly from Europe, like I see some of these wooden carved toys that there aren't a lot of them in America. So when I have to get one of those, like I bought one actually for my mom, this little owl, I think it might've been from, the Netherlands, but it was this carved owl, painted, but it cost $17 for this little thing. But all of the items don't have to be $17. Like 10 of them could be 50 cents, and that you have this one pretty one. So I'm curious, what do you think about that? Just ensuring that something's beautiful around the house,
Yeah, I think that we often think of toys as what children are going to traditionally want to play with, but actually having beautiful items. I think that's something that you can also show children. We have special things in our house, and or even cultural items, because here in the Netherlands, we have a lot of people who have different backgrounds who are, in relationships. And it's really nice for a Japanese parent to be able to, show some piece of artwork from, Japan, as well as a parent from the Netherlands. And, they can have their traditions and cultures being shown as with beautiful items around the home. And it might even be then having some clogs that are hanging on the wall, but sometimes they come down and the kids play around with them. Not many people are walking around with wooden clogs these days, but it's definitely part of living in Holland.
Can I just ask you, it's funny just raising clogs. What were people doing with those things? Like when they actually farm? It's just so amazing because kids will ask me, like, why were people wearing those? Like, what was going on?
It rains a lot in the Netherlands, so it's pretty wet up in the paddocks.
Anyhow,
okay. Super funny. I think another thing to mention is that, like, I don't even think that you should have Montessori materials in the home, like once a child starts a preschool environment anyway, that the pink tower and the brown stair and all the sensorial materials really, particularly if your child is attending a Montessori school, they're not going to be engaged with the materials if you have the same materials at home. And that's when it gets expensive. If you're trying to set up a Montessori classroom in your own house, where really what kind of things would a child want to play with when they're at home? And I'd have more like open-ended things for them to explore and go outside into nature, and setting up my home so they're accessible to the child. So things like setting up my kitchen so that the kitchen drawer has their plates down low. So all of these things actually don't cost any money to do, because they're things that, you're in your house, but how you set them up is in a way that the child can be successful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because one of the things I had, I was like, what do you do in your house? And I said, the real thing you should be doing is getting out of the house. So when you said go out in nature. So I think that's one of the budget things you can do. And I mean, I think about as an adult, like, wherever you are, there's so many little nooks and areas in your city that you have not seen. So you just imagine a child outside. It's just like, any time you walk around, it's going to be something new, So I say get out of the house on a budget, so.
Yeah. And then also, I think for young kids, having a step stool available that they can use in the kitchen or use in the bathroom. So my children are 17 and 18, so they didn't have these fancy learning towers, which I think are really great because they do really help a child be successful in the kitchen. But if you're on a budget, it doesn't mean that you have to have all of these things. It means you can. I had a collapsible ladder, the ones they use for painting, and then I would actually just fold it up and put it away because there wasn't room in our kitchen to have something available all the time. And I just needed to make sure that I was standing next to them because there wasn't, the safety of them being able to fall backwards or whatever. But yeah, we never had any problems with it. And I've got a picture of my daughter making a sandwich on that at 16 months. So it gave her a lot more access to be at the adult's height, where all the things were. But otherwise, also, a low table is very handy. So when I was doing baking when my kids were really small, I just bring a little table into the kitchen and we'd do some baking down low so I could bring the ingredients down to their height and they could do the mixing and things like that. So there's a few options as well.
I'm happy you raised it. Maybe wherever this is, we'll have some links to, like basic ladders and then all the way up if you have the learning towers. I've seen people definitely homemake those things. So it's a little bit safer or seemingly safer. But it's funny how it's like the cheapest thing of a learning tower is the learning ladder. And it's a basic painter's ladder or like a tiny little stool. So I'm with you. I like that.
But the only thing I would spend money on is books, or at least have a library card. And in most libraries they're free, or you would pay a very small amount to have a library card. And we just used to go and get 10 books at the library, and every 3 weeks we'd bring them back. And it's one of my favorite things was walking to the library and swapping books over. And when my children, I actually got really sad one day when my kids were about 13 or 14, and we were walking to the library one Sunday, and I'm like, this is one thing I'm really going to miss. Like, it just all of a sudden you realize you just have to enjoy every little moment because they take themselves to the library now if they ever need to pick up a book for school and things like that. But yeah, books.
Isn't that funny to the books? Because I remember there's a definite time in my life, right about like late teens, where I started getting into reading, and then I started realizing, man, my money is going towards books. Like, it's such a weird thing to think that a lot of my money, I'm losing money because I'm buying books. So I like that, but I think it's that important where if your money's going to go somewhere, go in some good books. And I have a question for you, because one of the things I thought of was, if you're talking about on a budget or just something that's really important in the house, is an animal, some type of animal. And I'm curious, I don't know what the youngest ages with dogs and what the experience has been in your, world and so forth, but just I'm going to tell you what I think about, and then I'm curious how you would approach it. But there's nothing like getting a living creature inside your house to really show the value of life, what it requires, that you can be involved in it. And it's an endless possibility to connect learning to, because what does he eat? How does he breathe? All these different things. But what's your experience with animals? Because I just think of them as something, definitely as children get older too, is like huge. What's your experience been?
Yeah, even with young children, they really enjoy having animals and things like that. And I think there is now a question about, keeping hamsters and things in captivity. So it is something to realize that we have to honor that dogs aren't necessarily meant to be kept in a home. And so that's your own moral question that you need to have to.
This could be a fun conversation here, Simone.
I don't know enough about it, but it's a good question.
Edgy. Well, So what I would say is I think what I do in just my life is like, I'm going to just tell you straight. So I'd love somebody to come on and be like, well, dogs would be much better out when on their own. And I'm like, oh, I've seen some dogs out on their own and they can be attacked and killed. So I think what might be a good argument, and this is somebody like Cesar Millan, who's the dog whisperer, who I love. But by the way, parents, have you read that, by the way, Simone, or no? The Dog Whisperer?
I know him, but I haven't actually read it.
Oh my God. I recommend it as like one of the best parenting books out there. But what he says it's really like dogs are psychologically damaged today because particularly in America, you put them inside of a house, you give them all sorts of love all day long, which is so unnatural to dogs that usually are in a pack environment. So he says, you need to get your dog outside, long times, long walks. Don't just shower love on them. It's very much like a child, interestingly. But to me, like you just said, the idea that we should somehow never have a pet in the home because their natural environment is outside, we could have a fun time talking about that one, because I'm not about that.
I don't know enough. Okay, so going back to another thing though, is that really what I also find is like, I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out to say I can't afford Montessori, because even if you couldn't make any material or even have a ladder, I really think that Montessori comes back to how you are with the children. Mm-hmm. Like if I was a teacher and I couldn't afford any Montessori materials for my classroom, but I went and hung out with kids and just was curious about the world around them, supported them through like difficult conversations with each other, went outdoors, played, that to me is more Montessori than any expensive climbing wall that's in my classroom. You know what I mean? Just that honor and respect for a child and the conversations that we can have, the curiosity and the responsibility, those kind of things, they're so important to me, as a Montessori approach.
I love that you raise that, and I got to say in studying, because I study a lot of American history, and a lot of these guys, they just had their kids out on the farm. They were reading a lot of books, like classic books. They had their kids on the farm. They were taking them out into the world, roaming around. And in some ways, Montessori obviously was clearly after, this is the American Revolutionary era. She was after that time period, but in many ways they were living Montessori. This is about, how you are with your child, as you were saying, Simone, and then getting them out in the world, showing them love, exposing them to the world. So I completely agree at the kind of fundamental level, Montessori is not materials. So I'm with you. We just in the class, and actually I met a few people at one of these conferences, and they had made their own materials. They definitely weren't, quote, as beautiful as these Neen House and the most beautiful, but they had made them. So I agree with you. It would be a cop out if you're like, well, I can't do Montessori because I can't afford the materials. Go to the core, as you're saying. So I agree.
And actually, one question I get asked all the time, I think I'm going to have to write a blog post on it somewhere, is it's kind of like, how can you do Montessori even if your child doesn't go to a Montessori school, because we don't have a Montessori school in the area, or we can't afford the Montessori school and that kind of thing. And I really do think that all of these principles apply in how you can parent your child, even if they're at a traditional school. And I guess the biggest conversations that will come up is like, why am I getting punished at school, or why are they giving me a gold star at school and at home we don't do that? That would be like a really fun conversation to just keep having. But other than that, you can apply all of these ideas in your own home.
Yeah. So kind of what you're saying is like, you can be the Montessori parent at home. It's what do you do if you don't have that school, the Montessori school, and your child is in a traditional schooling? How do you integrate those two together? And I think that's a very challenging question. But I love what you're saying. It's like, well, whenever your child comes home, just be that Montessori parent. It doesn't matter where he is during the middle of the day, although it's challenging, but be that Montessori parent. I like that. Cool.
And also, like the way that they handle situations that come up from the school, like I missed out on the award of the week or something, that's what they do in a
Yeah.
traditional school. And then you
Yeah.
can manage it in a Montessori way, which is not to say, oh, don't worry about it, you'll get another time, or to moralize, like not everyone can get the prize, but really like, oh, you were really disappointed? Is that something that was important to you to get? And,
Yeah.
to manage those emotions in a way that's very Montessori, which is to, guess the child's feelings and support them in those difficult moments when something doesn't go their way.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, basically, kind of acknowledging emotions, whatever the child brings home. I've seen, and I'm curious if you've seen this, Simone. I've seen people that have environments that they're not too happy with in schooling. So when the child comes home and complains, and they get into this, oh, well, your teacher doesn't really know what she's doing. I mean, so you've heard that. Okay. You're shaking your head. Yes. So you've seen that. So what do you think of that?
Yes. Well, I think that our attitudes to what the school of choice is really important. And that if you have a negative feeling about it, then maybe you should look for a better option or come to peace with it, because otherwise they're just hearing this negative story. And
Yeah.
like, if that's the only environment available, then look at all the positive things that that school is giving your child. It's a safe place. It's giving them access to children who live in their local area, because I think that's really important. I know I have a guy who I really respect, and he wants to homeschool his children, but he also wants them to grow up in New York with other kids who grew up in New York. So he just sends them to the local public school. So he gets that. And then he does lots of interesting projects with them on the weekend, and they're opening their own businesses and trying out stuff like
Wow.
that.
Sounds awesome.
So I think there's value. So it's how you view the world. Everything is a choice. So if you don't like your choice, change it,
Yeah. Change it. I think that's
And
one of the reasons I think I connected with you, Simone, and just is because of just that. I think you have a sense of life, like just what you said. If you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, I mean, it's this kind of old cliche, but then you have to get it to peace with where you're at right now, And I think that is huge for us as adults, and it comes through, I think, in how we model for children. So I raise that because I know I'm really doing that for a lot of teachers out there that they hear, their parent is saying the opposite of what they're saying at school, and they're kind of confrontational about it. And I think that it's a sad situation when you're putting your child kind of in the middle of two adults. So it's better to just acknowledge what the child's bringing at home, but not, rail on the teacher or rail on traditional schooling to your child, because that's going to be problematic. So.
And I remember actually when my son moved from a Montessori school into a non-Montessori high school. And so there was a school that he really liked in the Netherlands in their last year of primary school. You go and visit all the high schools, and he chose one that was very scientific, but it is a very classical kind of school. So we talked about what the differences will be. Well, you won't be able to just get up from the classroom and go to the toilet. You'll need to tell the teacher that you're going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
If you're late to school, they have this thing that if you're late, then you get all these punishments and things like that. And he said things like, well, I think it's a stupid rule, but, and I'm happy with that school. And in the whole time he was in high school, he's now finished just last year. He was late a few times, and they were things like he had a puncture on his bike, or he maybe slept late one day, but they weren't him actually, not wanting to be at school or, mistrusting the rules. So he kind of did respect the rules. So I think that Montessori kids do, you can talk to them about the differences.